Welcome back. I hope everybody had a good summer. I am looking for somebody who can take minutes for this evening's meeting, please. I got
I'll
three
take,
committee members here.
I'll take the minutes.
Thank you, Gladys. I appreciate that. All right. So we have what will hopefully be the wrap up of the 4000 series happening this evening. We were working on this all last year, and these are the last several policies that we have. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Kelly and to Kim.
Thank you. Can everyone see my screen okay? So the first part of the 4000 series wrap up is that there are several policies that are not required. So they're not CABE required policies, but they are existing policies that we have in our manual. And so we want to take a look at each one of these 4 policies to see if we wish to continue them and make any revisions or eliminate them. So I will start with the first one, which is 4135.16 work stoppages. And really, I know everyone's had the information and hopefully had an opportunity to look at it. So I'll start with any questions that may exist. And then we can talk about, recommendations for, again, do we want to make any revisions, accept the policy as is, or do we feel that we could discontinue it because it's no longer needed?
I'm sorry, I was away and I didn't get a chance to look at them. What do you recommend, Kelly?
I can, Kelly,
Do you want to jump in?
this one is about, strikes, slowdowns, disruption of service. I would leave it as it is. In Connecticut, you have a statute that says teachers are not allowed by law to strike in Connecticut. You don't have the same kind of statute for other bargaining units. To be honest, I don't know what would really happen if we were to use this as, this is a violation of your contract. I don't know what would be the result of it. It's pretty old policy, but I'm sort of in the do no harm camp. I would leave it. You never know whether it might be kind of a lifeline. If we did have a situation where we had a work stoppage, I've never heard of one. But I think I would be inclined to leave it as is. It's not damaging anything by being in there.
So I just have one quick question. I obviously just want to make sure that we're doing this in a way that aligns with CABE as much as possible. And I noticed that they call this policy work stoppages, and we have it listed as disruption of service. Does it make sense to just adjust the name? I know that's a minor thing, but
No, I don't think it actually, I think it is actually a really important point, and I think it's part of the issue with shoehorning into the CABE structure. When we decided to use CABE as our platform, it came along with all of their numbers and titles and everything. So I don't actually know the answer to that, Kate, but I would think that I agree. It makes infinite sense to actually call it disruption of service and not work stoppage. I think that's important. I think we'd have to probably go back with CABE and see how they change it. I just don't know if it's a, square peg in a round hole or what.
okay. Thank you.
Um,
Go ahead, Michelle.
so I'm inclined to, yes, that'd be great if you get that information, but if it isn't necessary, I'm not necessarily, in support of putting something in that isn't necessary.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think, Michelle, the only thing I'm thinking is let's say that one day that there is a strike or a work slowdown. And we are looking for every means possible to challenge the legality of that, right? We want to be able to say, we can't say it's against the law because there's no statute for example, if the non-certified people were to strike. But if there were, it seems to me that one arrow in our quiver could be, well, we have a policy labeling this a breach of contract. I think there would be a legal issue and litigation about whether or not that is right. I don't think anybody could tell you the answer to that right off the top of their head, because I think it would be around facts. That's the nature of litigation. So if this is an arrow in the quiver that existed some time ago, whether it works or not, I guess my feeling is it's not contrary to law. It's not doing any harm, and it may provide you an advantage in litigation one day were you to encounter it over a work slowdown. That's all I'm thinking. Again, very speculative, very, very speculative.
And that's the part, I guess, for me, because it is so speculative, you know what I mean?
Sure.
So maybe if you answer, we can get back to Kate's question, but that is it. It's very speculative. So just having been on the board, this will be the 4th year, we've had issues where a policy was in place, right? That we
Mhm.
had to remove. So if it isn't something that is required and it's very speculative, then I would probably not want to support that. But unless you can come back with that answer and something changes,
Well, the answer is only going to affect the label. The
Yeah.
answer is not going to the
whatever you'd
substance.
like to do, I'm gonna say then I would not be in support.
So Kim, can I just ask a clarifying question here? Um, 2 clarifying questions. One, I just want to confirm, this is a policy that already exists on our books, correct?
Yep.
Okay, and my second question is, this policy aligns with Connecticut state law as far as what is
Doesn't-
required of our staff.
It doesn't contradict state law
Okay,
Right.
to the extent that it applies to non-certified people. I mean, the state law already says exactly what this says for our certified staff.
And
So
if
the
I,
law says teachers shall not strike in Connecticut. Doesn't say anything about other people.
and this policy extends to both groups. So you'll see the dual numbering of this policy. So meaning that, yes, it's in alignment with the law regarding teachers, and we're also applying, and it's not contradictory to non-certified staff. And I think that's what Kim is speaking to as a potential advantage at a future date if we should so need it. And the
So you-
date of this policy, sorry, Kim, the date of the policy was October 27th, 1999 was the date in which that this was adopted, and has been on the books for that long.
It also, in this piece that you can see, during each day or portion thereof of a disruption, you'll be liable to pay the cost of continuing insurance. I mean, if you have your workforce that goes out on strike, this policy says they shall, by policy, reimburse you for their continuing insurance. If we remove this policy, you won't have,
If you remove it, what would happen? What
you
would
wouldn't
be-
have that anymore because you wouldn't have this language anymore. Your policy says this was what will happen if there's a disruption in service.
so in other words, if we don't have this policy in place and say that there is a strike, and teachers are bound under state statutes,
Mhm.
but there's nothing binding anybody who's non-certified. And they could potentially strike, and then we would be responsible for continuing to pay out their insurance during the course of the strike.
We'd at least be arguing over it for sure. Right?
And this you're saying would prohibit that?
I'm saying you have a policy that says during each day or portion thereof, participants shall be liable to the board for payment of the full amount of the cost of their continuing employee insurance. So the policy says, so you'd be arguing about the enforceability of it, but you would have it.
Right. So you're looking to go for the first read to the board, or like, what is the
Well, there'd
step?
be no, yeah,
or
there'd be no
state?
change. This is already an existing policy, so there'd be no change. If you
It
want
would
to
just,
remove
we would
it,
just renew the policy adoption. We had this conversation, I think, at one point. Can you just refresh our memories, please? Because it's been a while, and I think we all just want to make sure we're on the same page. If we were to renew this policy, and so the policy adopted date would then reflect our current year, does that go through the board for a first and second read?
I think again, it's been a long summer, but I think what we've done is we've taken the batch and the board has looked at them as a batch and said, fine, yes, keep them in place. I think we decided when we started this a while ago, back when we first started the project, that it was going to be an exercise in not just looking at changes, but looking to affirm the things that we already had.
Other members of the committee, can we hear from you on this particular policy, please?
Uh,
Go ahead, Terry.
was looking for the raised hand, thanks. Uh, will you say, that was a good question, Kate, but would you also say policy adopted October 27, 1999, updated or reviewed September 2024? Is that how it will, or would you go a policy adopted?
So if I could just add, if we were being consistent with the way we've done other ones, we've readopted existing policies to reflect the updated date when policies were very old, such as this one. It's not wrong to do it one way or another. Kim and I were actually talking about that today, but if we were going to be consistent with the way we've done the 0 series forward, it would be to readopt this policy and update the date.
Oh, so do you say readopted or just adopted?
We just had policy adopted in the most recent date that it was voted on by the board.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Again, we could look at that as a group. If we want to put readopted in a new date, I mean, we could do that. What we've done to date as we've went through the policies has been a little bit different. So I think there's consistency, that we want to keep across the policies.
Sure.
Yes, Juanita?
Hi, good evening. Can I go back to the very first paragraph? Can you scroll that down? Thank you. Yeah. So in the last portion, it says that shall be considered a violation of the employee's binding and legal contract with the Board of Ed. So is this wording that is already in the signed contract? Signed contracts that we have with the Board of Ed?
Is there no strike? Are you asking, is there no strike language in our employee agreements? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't apply to teachers, right? Because teachers have a statute. So in our non-certified staff, no, it's not language that exists. But I think the policy's intent, the reason why it's written this way, it's very old, but the reason why it's written this way, I think, is because were you to challenge, let's say you want to go and you want to have an enforcement action to require people to return to work because, you have to have 180 days of school, you have to have non-certified, whatever the reason is, and you're in litigation. I think that what this endeavors to do is to say, one argument you would have is that these folks are breaching their employment agreement with you, their contract with you, and that this, by definition, a strike, slowdown, or refusal, by definition, will constitute a breach of contract. So the court can skip over that argument about whether or not there's a breach of contract because you've defined it in this policy. I think that's what this is intended to do. So no, it's not in any of our current contracts. It wouldn't be in the teacher's contract because of the statute, but it is not in the contract. The language is not, no. Does that make sense?
And it's in no other contract either, right? Employee contract.
I don't think so, Anita. I'm going through my head. I don't remember seeing it anywhere. No. Again, it's a policy that defines the term breach if you're in litigation. What is a breach?
Okay, any other feedback on this particular policy?
So we're just changing the title?
I believe Kim was going to look into that before we make any formal decision. So we might table this particular policy rather than making a recommendation to the board for it until we have that answer. Okay, I don't see anybody else with their hand up here, so I think we can move on to the next current policy for review.
Okay. So I just placed on the screen, this policy is solicitation by employees, policy 4137. So I will open it up for questions for anyone on the committee in reference to this policy. Again, it is a policy that has been in place since November of 1999. And the question here is, do we feel it's not a CABE required policy? Do we feel that we need a policy specifying these terms and conditions for our employees? Would we like to make any changes to this policy? Or do we feel it is not necessary and we'd like to remove the policy?
Do folks need a moment here to read?
It looks like the title on this one is to be changed. You have it listed here, soliciting and selling, and then the new one is solicitation by employees.
That is correct. And the titles of these, the numbers have been updated for CABE. We already made that vote as a board to renumber all of the policies. Along with that, in the past policies, we have made any updates to the labels of the policies to be in alignment with CABE. So certainly we can get feedback on that, additional feedback if this group would like. But if we were to do what we've done from the 0 series forward, we have made the titles and the numbering consistent with the CABE series.
So Kelly, just to back up for a moment then, with the work stoppages and the disruption of service, if what you're saying is accurate, then the work stoppages will become the new title for that particular policy?
If we were being consistent with what we've done so far, then yes, we would change the title to be the CABE title.
Kim, given your feedback on that previous discussion, does that seem okay to you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this one's that far off. The other one seemed wildly off to me. This one seems to me to be.
Close.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so what's listed are the new titles, and what's on the policy you're showing us is the old. Okay.
Correct.
New titles, okay. Or updated titles.
That is correct.
Go ahead, Juanita.
Thank you. So just as food for discussion, some clarification with the definition of solicitation. And okay, so let me give an example. I need to look at it because I need to see the whole thing. So you'll see me turning to my other screen. In Danbury High School, each year they do the March Madness pool, and somebody wins the money. Somebody, has a financial gain. It also says activities which are not approved by the principal or designee. So our activities like that need to be approved by the principal, number one. And then further down, it said something about, I guess you have to get approval from the principal then to do tutoring, in which teachers or paras or those in the school do tutoring for personal gain. Where they actually advertise their tutoring services.
Tara's your hand up?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the March Madness tournaments and that occurs pretty widely across the district. And I'm trying to clarify in my mind, yes, someone gains from that, but I don't know if it's someone like is running a business to make a profit necessarily. So, different from someone coming in to solicit the students for tutoring services or advertising their tutoring services, which I think would be problematic. We've also had people from time to time. I mean, people drop off Avon books, right, on the table, and is that solicitation? And so I guess, I appreciate the discussion on the definition, because there are things that are just sort of regular standard practice that just occur in buildings. But I'm wondering, if the spirit is around someone who's, the financial gain component of it that's not directly tied to the benefit of the school and the students. So, I don't know to what extent we have to list all of those things. But I think my guess the intent would be that the way I'm seeing is that, that it's really about a conflict of interest. And I would think it would probably have to start with approval at the principal level so that they're aware of what's going on in the building. And that might be a way to help determine conflict.
Thanks for
Someone
that
who's
feedback.
someone who's profiting off of this, off of some type of activity within the school.
So if that's the case, I think the language in this particular policy, the way that it's written, it's pretty restrictive. And the examples you're giving, Dr. Casimiro, might fall within the bounds of enforcing this policy. So if that's the case, then we ought to look at making some adjustments here. Juanita,
Yeah, I
thank you
mean,
for bringing those examples forward.
sure. Yeah.
The other thing that I will just add is that you also have, and we've previously reviewed them, some code of ethics for teachers and administrators. And so, not utilizing their position of power, for lack of better words, and those are my words, I'm not pulling it directly from the policy, but those are also covered in your ethics policy. And so this is not a necessarily legally required policy. And if you felt that it was too restrictive, you could vote to repeal this policy as a group.
Michelle?
Just wondering about the Career Academy and that whole model of, engaging different internships and different, what those partnerships that we're looking to build, and, how that might even play into what we're looking at. So I think, once we start digging a little bit deeper and we start to really even realize what that model looks like, or you guys, I'm sure, will unfold to us further very soon. That might all be a part to consider in this as well. Thanks. Good.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I'll just go back to, if I can, just one thing on the tutoring stuff. I mean, for time immemorial, we've had, teachers that would teach, a student struggling in math, and another math teacher would tutor, or they would know of a math teacher who would be willing to tutor. And that has always been okay. What has not been okay is if the teacher that's directly teaching the student is the one to do the tutoring, because that's the conflict piece, right? So that it's, someone is directly benefiting by a situation that's occurring in the classroom. And, there's a slippery slope of, well, I'll just catch you up after school, for a fee. And so that has been something that has always been a very clear conflict of interest. But we've had, teachers tutor other students all the time, so long as they're not on their roster.
My screen just went black. Does anybody else's?
Mine as
Yeah,
well.
It's
I've
Mine
also
too.
seen that.
Yeah, I think it mentions that in this policy. I think I read that earlier, exactly that it wouldn't be like the teacher directly, but another staff.
Yes, the wording on the policy, and I just unshared to try to get the screen to come back, but the wording on the policy would be on the current roster or in the current class.
Do we want to try to construct a revised policy? Do we want to repeal this policy, given that there are other policies that sort of cover some of this content already? Kim, from a legal standpoint, do you have any feedback for us here?
I
Okay.
don't, I think it's up to you.
Okay. What's the appetite of the committee?
I say keep it. If it Cabe already has some, I'd say keep it. If there's an issue, then he come. I mean, it doesn't seem to have any conflicts here. It just spells it out.
I think my hesitation comes from Juanita's bringing up at least a couple examples of things that, depending on how one decided to enforce the policy, could bring those activities forward as a conflict of interest under this policy. So I just want to make sure that, and I understand what you're saying as well, Terry, because the policy's been in place, and yet these other things are taking place without repercussion. I just want to make sure, because the policy is the thing that guides everything, that we're doing our due diligence to have a policy that matches how we're actually going to enforce what's happening in the schools.
Well, maybe like the principal, he or she participates in those March Madness or whatever, funds, or whatever.
I would keep it. I would keep it, and I'll tell you, Unita brought a good point. But I see those pools as more for the staff than for the students. And even if you did one for the students, just for the record, as long as the principal authorizes it, I think it brings motivation to an enthusiasm into the classroom, like a competitive type of thing. I understand that somebody is profiting, but I think what we're trying to do here is that if a particular teacher has a business that is bringing into the school that someone is profiting in school, I think that's what the rule is looking at. That's my interpretation of it. I don't think that the March Madness or Super Bowl pool or whatever, it's a motivating factor. It makes things happen. It makes people excited in school. I've seen that at Westdale High School and throughout the year. It brings the kids, or the staff really pumped up and motivated to continue on until that particular day. Just my opinion.
Can I just add? I think my conflict is that the words for financial gain. So you're saying the competition with the students, somebody is benefiting. So let me give you this example. So Al, we don't have, but let's just say we have an automotive department at our school, and highly favored by a lot of the students. And our automotive teacher goes into business as training as driver's ed, a driving business. Our kids know them, our staff know them, may even direct students, parents to them. What do you think? Is there a conflict?
It could be a conflict. It could also be a conflict if the teacher is asking students to bring their cars in to be fixed and charge the price to the kids. Then it's a conflict. That's a financial gain there for the teacher. Or a teacher allowing a student to fix cars to other students in school property. That's a financial gain.
Well, I think it says for that leads to financial gain of the employee. And so if you have that business, and I'm not against, most teachers have to work 2 or 3 jobs to get by. I'm just throwing out, who decides what a conflict is, who decides, the financial gain, who, and so anyway, I guess in the end, I'm voting to keep it in.
Well, I'll even throw something at you. The financial gain would be if the teachers are supposed to be teaching a class and doing mechanical work. The
No,
gain,
even outside of the classroom on their own time. But you're directing, I mean, maybe it's me, I'm a counselor and the parent says, my child needs driving classes. And I might say, oh my gosh, so-and-so has a driving school. Go there.
I would think that the district would either approve that prior to the leading teacher to have any kind of, in this case, driving school in advertised. I think that you bring a good point on the driving teacher. If I'm saying I'm a teacher and you're a counselor and says, oh yeah, Mr. Almeida has a school, driving school, by you providing that information to me, for me to reach out to them, it's like it's not, as long as the way I understand it is that as long as I'm not gaining financial from where I'm representing first, which is my first job, which is the public schools. What I do after work, it's my business. But if you yourself as a counselor give the parent a card, again, or not even a card, you just know for a fact that I teach driver's ed, maybe the conversation turns to that unofficially.
I guess some of this comes down to what we think solicitation is.
Solicitation, what
I-
we think.
I think if somebody's asking for information, to me, that's not, you're not soliciting them by providing the information they're asking of you, or providing a resource. But that's just my perspective. Michelle? You're on mute, Michelle, sorry.
I think all the points being brought up are really good. And I agree with Al and I agree with Juanita. And I think, again, it's going to be that it's what we're trying to build is that engagement with partnerships and the community. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that potentially, coming up than we are right now, just saying, are you just, tutoring a class? But we're literally, I thought, building a model and engaging and in the community and kind of building those internships. So it's going to be, I think I was looking to support it as well. I just think, it's going to be almost like a learning curve as we create this model and these issues become more relevant in that model. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. It's definitely, I agree with Al. It builds energy in that communication in the classroom. If it's approved by the principal, let's say the principal has the ability to approve that March Madness and it's known, and let's say it gets communicated to the board or publicly, like, hey, whatever school had March Madness and whatever, if it's public and it's approved, I think it's fine. But obviously, as long as we're looking at everything carefully and making sure that as we are developing this new model, creative model, that this is going to be questions that we're going to continue to ask, I think.
A good example of solicitation, the way I would see it, is me being a teacher, and me telling all my students in my classes to say, hey, you have to go to this location to buy this. And I give everybody a business card. That's the solicitation. Not knowing if I'm going to get a cut or not. Probably will be getting a cut. But that's not, I look at it as part of a solicitation on that part. Is encouraging people, telling people to buy from a particular source. That to me, it's a conflict of interest, and it's a violation of the teacher's ethics. And again, we have those things, but as going back to the policy, I would just leave it as it is. I don't think there's nothing wrong with the policy.
Okay, can we take a quick temperature then, folks who are in favor of keeping the policy versus not keeping the policy? Terry,
Aye,
you're in favor of
yes.
keeping the policy?
yes.
Okay. Juanita,
Yes.
okay. Michelle,
Yes.
Al,
Yes,
all right. With that, can I have a motion to recommend this to the board for reapproval?
I make the motion that we present this to the board for approval.
May I have a second, please?
I'll second.
Thank you, Michelle. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. So let's move on to the next policy number. That's 4140.2/4240.2, non-bargaining unit employees.
Kim, could I just ask that you present it on the screen as mine is experiencing a glitch right now?
Can you see that? It's not.
Right now we see the agenda. So I don't know if there's a different window you have to highlight or if you can click on the different window
There it is. You can see that?
on the
If you click on the number, Kim, right before non-bargaining unit
you see that?
employees, you'll see it.
Where? Click where, Cal?
On the number 4140.2, right before non-bargaining unit employees, it's the third one down.
Can't see that. I don't see where you mean.
Yeah, that was the one.
That
Yeah.
was it. There. One more back. 42.
No, that's a
41.
solicitation.
No, you were on the
Yeah.
right one. It's the next one,
Yeah.
Kim. This one here.
Yeah.
Is this the one we were told that we don't? need to know?
I didn't hear that.
Terry, you want to try that again?
Sorry. Is this the policy we were told at the last board meeting that we don't have the authority to do this?
This did come up for conversation, and this is the policy that sort of governs how the process works. So if everybody could just take a moment to read it real quick, make sure that you take a look at the details there, and then we can have a conversation about it. In deference to the position this puts both Kelly and Kim in, I'm going to try to lead this conversation.
Could you make the wording a little bit bigger, please?
I think they can. Can they?
Why is it everything comes off printed so tiny?
So Kim, if you go to the three dots in the corner next to new Chrome available in the upper right-hand corner. Yep, the three dots. And then you should be able to go down to Zoom. There we go. Okay, has everyone had a chance to read it? I'm gonna take that as a yes. I have her nose here. So this did come up for conversation, and one of the things that we had talked about with the board was the possibility of adjusting the date for this policy so that we as a board would have a sense of what that allocation was going to look like um, before the budget had been approved, so that we can have a little bit more robust conversation around it. I think the challenge we were experiencing before was that we were learning about this allocation before or by July 1st, and typically that just fell at the end of the school year, which was past our budget cycle, which made it difficult for us at that point to feel like we had any input as to how things were being handled. So I just want to open this up now to conversation and see what feedback folks have for us.
Kate, is there a second part to that? Where it starts with the superintendent will establish, or we're not looking at that?
Where are you looking, Juanita?
Well, I'm on the Danbury Public School website with policies, and so it's 4140.2, which
Hang on
can,
just a second.
well, I'm
I will
sorry, it
pull
has
that
an R in front of it.
Oh, that's the regulation. So that policy has a regulation it carries with it. The
Right.
regulation is sort of like the instruction for how to
How
apply the policy. So
we
guess
won't be looking at that?
we're looking at the policy right now. The regulation, I believe, would adjust to meet what we decide in the policy. Kim, is that accurate?
Well, do we set policy? So I'm asking about the regulation. Do we get a say in the R 4140.2?
Right. I just want to confirm that if we make an adjustment to the policy as the board, does that, the changes that we make there carry over automatically to the R, to the regulation?
I wouldn't vote for that to happen. I would want to look at the regulations without them automatically adjusting.
I just want a point of clarification, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So the regulation or the policy is what the board votes on. The
Mm-hmm.
regulations are like the implementer. So
Right.
the regulation can't override the policy. You set the
Right.
policy. And the regulations are the implementer, and the regulations are written by your administrative team to give guidelines for how to implement the policy. So they can change at any time. They don't come through a process of reading and vetting like your policies do. They're just implementers. Much like the Federal Register, the government puts out implementing regulations that are meant to support the legislation that the Congress passes. It's the same idea. So the staff put together the roadmap for how to implement the policy. And that's what your regulations are.
Okay. And so I guess my question is, do those regulations then come before the board?
No, they're just implementers. So it's like
I understand that. I just, it's not that I agree with it.
I understand.
So I understand that I understand that we are here to set the policy. I do think that there must be some stipulation somewhere where the regulations and how to handle that policy should at some point be at least, I'm looking at that, and it says something about
regulations are typically provided to the board as a point of information,
Correct.
but it's not something that we vote on as a board.
So I'll give you another example.
But,
So today,
um,
Kelly and I sat through 3 hours of Title IX training. Title IX, the legislation is written by the Congress, but the reason why we had the training today was because the staff at the Department of Labor and the State Department of Education have put out reams of regulations that talk about how to interpret what the statute was that was passed. It's the same setup.
And if I could just add, we would not change regulations without informing the board, but it is not the voting process that the policies go through.
Thank you for the clarification. Juanita, does that answer your question? Is there some confusion
I
about
mean,
it or
that-
just a difference of
that's-
opinion?
Well, that's the answer, but I'm hoping that there is later on some discussion. I just think it's very vague language in the regulations. I think that we have to look more carefully at the policy itself. This was one of the areas of contention when we moved forward with the budget. It was not only I, there were other members who apologized for not knowing this policy in advance, but we were in that big money crunch. And
Sure.
making sure that as we move forward, that this policy is exactly something, number one, that the why, answering the question, why does the board want this policy? What do we want from the policy? The need for the policy, and just moving forward with much transparency. So when you look, if for the other board members, if you have a chance to look at the regulations, I believe in implementing the policy are very vague. They're not very specific in, they talk about job performance based on performance evaluation, job performance, which meets the district standards for the position. And it also, at the end of the policy itself, I'm very concerned that the statement that says additional compensation and benefits, very vague, what are those? May be provided in recognition of service. What is that? What do you
So
mean?
I understand your concerns and those are things that I've thought about as well. I think in looking at this though, you know, our role in this is looking at the existing policy that we have.
Okay.
And if we're going to do that, one of the reasons that I suggest we take a look at that date on there, it says by July 1st, we have the power to move that date. So if, you know, to your point, the discomfort that some of us felt as board members in evaluating the budget process was in part due to not having concrete understanding of how the allocation was being made and how that was going to operate. If we shift the date that's in this policy, it forces that conversation to happen in advance of the budget cycle so that we can have a robust conversation about the compensation for central office exempt staff. Does that make sense? Like, I'm not sure.
It does. I think we're skimming over the wording.
Well, I also want to just sort of touch on the idea that like, as board members, we're not in a position necessarily to evaluate.
Oh, no, we can leave the regulation part alone, but the policy itself. I think
What
that
would-
we need to take time and look at how, as a board, we want that worded.
Okay, which is what we're doing right now. So
Okay.
I want to come back to this, Juanita, but Terry's had her hand up for a little bit, so let me just
Okay,
pop over
sorry,
to
Terry.
Terry.
Well, I agree with Juanita. There's no, for example, one year we had one person who didn't get a raise, and subsequently that person left. And there were reasons that person didn't get a raise. But the first sentence, it says, believes that an appropriate and equitable compensation plan shall be established for exempt administrative support positions. I don't see it. I don't see it. I don't see there's one. It's just across the board, whether you're here 1 year or a dozen years. I don't think it's being followed through. That's what I agree with Juanita. I agree the date should be changed, definitely. But I don't, to give raises just across the board for everybody, whether they, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
So one of the conversations, Terry, that happened around this when we were, having this conversation at the end of last school year, is that when, sort of assessing this particular group, it's important to understand that they're not part of a bargaining unit, right? And I do think that this became sort of a point of conversation that folks had different opinions about. But there was this idea that if this particular group of folks is not covered by a bargaining unit, is it fair and appropriate and equitable to treat them differently simply because they're not part of a bargaining unit? And to, look at their salaries and their compensation in sort of like a vacuum. And I think the danger in doing that, from my perspective, is that if you decide to say to one particular group, whether they're organized or not, we do not value the work you're doing on a level that we value the work that all these other bargaining units. are doing
That's
work
not what I'm
for us.
saying.
That's
No,
not what I'm saying
that's
either.
not what I'm saying,
Okay,
Kate.
I need
agree
one
with you.
person, excuse me, point of order. Everybody can say what they need to say, and that's fine, but I need for it to be orderly, and I need for one person to talk at a time. So if you want to say something, you're more than welcome to raise your hand. Please just wait for me to recognize you so we can keep this orderly, okay? Okay. I'm assuming somebody would like to talk because I did hear two voices at least. Juanita.
Thank you. Okay. I am not here to discuss, like all of the bargaining units and who we have contracts with. This is truly specific. Otherwise, we wouldn't be discussing the administrative and support positions in the central office in particular and specifically. What we have done in the past, from what I can understand, correct me if I'm wrong, it's just been a blanket across the board. Nobody wanted to separate the clusters. Nobody wanted to look at individually. I personally, and I don't, maybe we're not supposed to see, correct me, whether who looks at evaluations, who looks at, we're still waiting for some of the job descriptions. And so who does that? Does the board ever know? Is it something that we want to know? And in addition, we have language here in this policy, to me, that is very vague. I like the aim of the compensation. That's good. But to go on to say additional compensation and benefits, what would the additional, give me an example. What are you talking about? Over and above what you've already said was appropriate and equitable compensation. And then there's additional give me an example of how that's been added on in the past. And they may not, based on what's the criteria, where does the money come from, how is one recognized? So right now, I'm voting against this policy standing as it is.
Okay, thank you, Juanita. Terry, I know you were trying to speak before.
No, thank you.
Um, I'm certainly advocating for a change of the date that is listed here. I think that will help bring some transparency about some of the questions that we've had, as well as sort of help us inform the budget process. I guess what I'm also looking for, Juanita, if you feel that there's some vagueness to this, or there's some things that we'd like to see spelled out differently, I welcome your suggestions.
I do not like the last line in the first paragraph. We know what the aim of the policy is. And it says a compensation plan to attract and retain competent employees. And then the benefits should be equal to those of other comparable employees of the school system. Who compared to what? Other positions in the central office? That's very broad. And I agree with changing the date. At our meetings toward the end of the year, we had a discussion on, we don't vote on this. It's already in the budget. But this says that we shall approve. And so I guess since we approved the budget, then we approve the allocation. And I just think that that needs to be made very clear, that then you don't go back and vote on it again. So whatever is brought forth by the superintendent at that point, as far as the allocation, is in the superintendent's hands. And so it's probably not even necessary to bring it before the board, except just as an informative information.
May I ask a clarifying question, Juanita?
Mm.
When you talk about when we discuss the change that I'm suggesting, which is to adjust the date by which we receive information about this allocation, if it is, it does become part of the budget. So that might be then a point at which during the budget process, board members can reflect back and say, we don't like this allocation, or, this is what we'd like to see change with the allocation. And then have the option of voting, for or against the budget based on, in part, this criteria. Does that sound right? Or am I missing something in what you're asking?
Okay, so let's step back, address that last sentence, additional compensation, no clarification there, and benefits. What does that mean? And you said, we talked about changing the date. I believe that once we get to the point of having the budget, that is the sticky point of, I think I hear what you're saying, Kate, is, well, we can just not approve the budget. Who is going, at that point, who's going to really say, I'm not going to approve this budget until that adjustment is made to when we've spent hours and hours and hours on the budget? And that's why we were in that position, I think, last year. And so I don't know that
So
I
I think
agree with what you said.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that clarification. In terms of the additional compensation and benefits may be provided in recognition of meritorious service, I don't know how much teeth that statement has. So if it's something that folks feel strongly about, I'm certainly open to that conversation. With it being removed. as far as the budget piece, I think part of what I'm looking at here, the language, the Board of Ed shall approve an allocation for salary and benefit adjustments. Um, I look at that allocation as being at the discretion of the superintendent. And the reason for that is that the superintendent is the direct supervisor for these positions. We as board members are not supervising these staff members and can't really give a performance review in that sense. The only exposure we have with them is at board meetings or in any of the work that we might engage with for committee meetings. So we're not in a position, in my opinion, to really, assess them individually. So when we talk about this allocation that's approved, we might at that point say to the superintendent, we'd like to see how you're going to distribute these funds. And it does in fact say at the bottom, the superintendent shall report annually to the board concerning the implementation of the policy. But what we're talking about, for approval, we're talking about an allocation, which is a sum of money that the superintendent is then going to decide, to handle as she sees fit or as they see fit to the staff that is part of the central office exempt staff. And I do want to just also ask a clarifying question of either Kelly or Kim. I know that central office exempt staff encompasses more than just the cabinet members. Can you also remind us who else is included in this group, please?
It's generally all your administrative assistant staff, so all the people you see at 63 Beaverbrook and 43. It's also your occupational therapists and your PTs. It's anybody that is not in a union. Basically. So it's all your employees at will, is what this
Your
says.
BCAs, so your board certified behavior analysts also fall in this category.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. I appreciate that. So Juanita, back to your point, are there recommendations that you would have for, addressing the concern that you discussed, which was the idea that you feel like maybe, people are not going to vote down the budget based on this specific allocation?
Do you recall when the information was presented to us for the allocation for the salaries adjustment, the way in which it was presented was in a block form? What I mean by that, people were grouped and there was no individualization. It was across the board. And I'm not talking about necessarily the percentage or the amount, but certainly there was no separation. Everybody received, the uptick in the salary, the benefits, the additional compensation. And listen, again, we're not talking, as we said before, as a board, we are not talking about individuals. We're talking about a policy. And so therefore, we were given groups of people. And so I'm not sure, maybe perhaps a little bit more clarification from the superintendent, and maybe not, is what is the determination? And so, yeah, I've evaluated, and everybody, last year was a time when we would have voted for everybody to have, but I believe that in the past, we were told, well, that's how it was done in the past. We're just presented with it, and, this is, the decision, and we're supposed to go along with it. And so if we're not, what I am told by CABE is that it is policy that drives your district. And so I just feel that this is a policy that we, again, need to be careful with. Once we adopt it, do we have the opportunity to bring it back to policy and say, we want to look at this again? And I'm not sure of that process. Or are you saying, like every 4 years we'll look at it, or we'll look at it when it's outdated, as this one probably is. But to be brief, I would like that sentence removed. Additional compensation and benefits may be provided in recognition of meritorious service. I don't see where that even fits in if you're already compensating across the board with the plan that you have. So
I guess I'm looking at it like it just gives the superintendent some latitude in terms of, you know, when she's, evaluating her staff, her immediate staff, it gives her some latitude in decision making about how the allotment is made to each, to her employees. But I'm going to take a minute right now and let Kara speak because
Yes,
she's
I
got her
cannot
hand
find
up.
my hand. I'm so
Oh, okay.
And
sorry.
Terry, I'll come back.
I don't know why I can't find my hand tonight. So I apologize, but I do want to speak to this, and I want to just be very cautious around why the language exists, why it's been a policy for the length of time that it has been. Is that these are at-will employees. They are not in a bargaining unit, and I can give probably multiple examples of this summer alone between the end of the school year where we've lost employees, right? You're talking about also very unique. This is not one large group. So you're not talking about 1,000 teachers or 1,000, or 200 paraprofessionals. You have very role specific. You've got technologically specific jobs. You have people with very specific, computer capabilities. They're very unique dispositions. We have people in finance with very specific degrees in particular types of finance work that we do. So among the group, and then at will, we have to be able to attract and retain and be competitive with the market. The policy allows us to do that. In terms of meritorious service or benefits. So while last year, across the board, it looked pretty, much the same. We did break out two separate groups, based on some of the discussions with the board. But one of the things I'll go look at the policy. It talks about to be able to attract and retain competent employees. And I can tell you, sitting in my position, and especially in the last couple of years, having a sense of what other markets are have for the salaries for different employees, the number of turnover that we have, and trying to stay competitive. The benefit of the at-will employee contract is that you can get rid of an employee that's not really performing, and it's a pretty seamless process. But also B, that you can retain someone who you really need to retain, somebody who's acquired a tremendous amount of knowledge over several years, who, when they walk away from a district, you're scrambling to try to replace 10 years of knowledge and training that you've invested in someone, and when not having luck trying to find those folks. And so there are certain positions that you may want to, when you're trying to attract someone, offer an additional week's vacation to be competitive with a place that they've come from. When we post positions and ranges for things, that they're, unlike, in a union contract where it's very fixed, we are able to flex a little bit on the higher and on the low end within reason, to reward someone who has specific training or specific certification that runs outside of what a normal, what we're all typically used to in in the teachers union or the administrative union, which tend to be very fixed. And in some cases, what's great about a fixed contract is it's nice and easy and it's pretty clean. What's terrible about a fixed contract is that, for example, right now, I cannot attract a bilingual certified staff. I cannot attract certain special education groups because we cannot offer a bonus. We cannot offer additional compensation to get someone who's qualified to come to our district, because the contract is flat in that regard and fixed. Whereas where these highly specialized positions that we're talking about, mostly on this exempt staff list, is that you do have some ability bend and flex. And quite frankly, I feel that as a superintendent, I would be in the best position to understand that landscape with consultation, of course, dialogue with board members, as we talk about the needs of the school system, which I think that we've done a lot of that over the year, and we certainly have had our challenges, but certainly within the means of the budget and within the means of an allocation, that, you know, I'm able to make those adjustments as needed to make sure that we're retaining the staff and that we're attracting in certain positions. And from time to time, you know, I could think of, again, a couple of positions in particular right now where every school district is fighting for the same 4 or 5 people in the state that are available. And we have to be able to be responsive to that. And if that means we have to adjust a salary range, in some cases, it means that we have to go out when we don't, or we're not able to, we have to go out to a service and pay double to meet legal requirements, or to be able to make our state reporting requirements, or to be able to make, you know, whatever, an IEP requirement. So we do have to have some level of flexibility, and we do have to be in a position to be able to judge how to apply that from time to time. And the budget process, I think, has just highlighted the fact that, you know, it's put a big spotlight on this, but it has been, you know, the ability to bend and adjust, you know, to meet the needs of the school system over time. And again, you know, having, you know, one group, again, where we've had people with, you know, our, I'm sorry, my dogs are under my feet here. Groups that have, you know, fixed tables, they, you know, they're guaranteed, you know, whatever percent was 3% across the board, plus a step, plus whatever, all of that stuff is laid out and guaranteed. And those things move in unison and lockstep every single year, guaranteed. And this is a group where we actually have to move them for them. We have to move them up and over and adjust to keep up with a retention strategy.
Thanks, Dr. Casimiro.
You're welcome.
Terry, you had your hand up?
Yes, thank you. I think what Juanita is getting at, and what I'm looking at, that one list across the board, that equates everybody to the same level. I personally would like to see it levels A, B, and C, whereas the special teachers or staff that you need, that you're finding hard to get, maybe level B gets that extra incentive. No, if you want to do across the board a minimum, but extra incentive to that category to keep and retain. But to go across the board is just wild. It's just wild. Without even showing us what the unions got percentage wise increases, all the unions, and give us an idea. I feel like we're led in the dark. This is the end goal, and sure, we want to compensate. I like getting a raise. It's not against giving a raise, but it seems to lack any not categorization, but you know, each area has its own specialty, and recognizing that area that is really needed is important, but then you give it across the board, doesn't make sense.
So these points are all taken. I'm still I'm looking directly at this policy and thinking about, you know, what we might do with this policy, because every decision that we make as a board and as a committee here has to be sunk into the policies. And I don't know how exactly to articulate the things that you guys are asking about in the policy, but I'm open to suggestion about that. What I think we might do, because it's 7:15 at this point, is consider tabling this particular policy and revisiting it. And I wonder if that is acceptable to the members of the committee here.
Okay with me?
I'm okay
That's
with
okay with me.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. So we will table this, but I would ask that between now and the next policy meeting, folks come up with some concrete wording, suggestions, ideas about the language they would like to see reflected in here, because without that, it's going to be very difficult for us to move forward. Okay? And that brings us to 4147.22/4247.1, bloodborne pathogens, communicable diseases.
Are you just going to make a motion to table it, or are you just going to table it? Just let it. Are you? Do you
do we
need a
need a
motion to
motion?
table it?
Do we need a motion? There was no motion on the table as far as
Okay.
recommending it or anything like that. So I think we'll just make a note
Leave
that
it
it's
flat
tabled.
as if. Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Gladys.
So as Kim's pulling up the next policy, the bloodborne pathogens, again, this is not a required policy, but it is something in practice that our staff, both certified and non-certified, are required to do an annual training on bloodborne pathogens. And this is essentially to protect any staff member that may come in contact, for example, with bodily fluids of a child or another person in the school environment, to make sure that they are equipped with knowing what to do, how to protect themselves, and how to protect others within the environment. So it is a state required annual training. So we will do the training regardless of policies. It really is up to the board whether or not to keep this in practice. As far as a specific policy, we will do this in practice. I want to clarify, we will do this in practice regardless of the policy, but we can also have this policy outlining it.
Committee members, is there any strong feeling about this?
I would keep it.
I would keep it. And
Juanita?
change it if with the title.
As highlighted?
Can you explain why the yellow highlight and the changes to the?
Yes,
Sure.
it's just a title change. So the coordinator of health services is Carrie Burke. And she is the person that is directly responsible for making sure that our training is updated and collecting information on staff members. Formerly, that was delegated to a medical advisor who is a part-time consultant with the school on medical issues. But the true responsibility in practice has lied with the coordinator of health services.
Can you scroll down a little bit more, because there's more that's highlighted. So the change to
So
can
that's,
you go into the
yeah.
next change, please?
So I apologize, Michelle, I did not mean to cut you off. The same thing, that position, when this policy was originally adopted, was Director of Health Services, and now it's the City Director of Health Services and Human Services. So it's just to reflect the accuracy of the title currently.
Kelly, in that same paragraph, the second part that's highlighted, are we still calling it in collaboration with the school medical advisor, or are we putting in coordinator?
So, yes,
Or-
so you will see, Juanita, there both. You have the Coordinator of Health Services, who is Carrie Burke. We then have a school medical advisor, which is a medical doctor that we consult with if there is any higher level issue that we need advice on. So we have listed the district coordinator, the medical advisor, and the city health department as all three of them collaborate on this initiative. Did that clarify? I just want to make sure.
Yes, yes. Mhm.
I know they're complicated titles, but they are three different individuals.
So,
Michelle?
thank you. Is it coordinator or health services, or is it supposed to be consistent with below of health service, the coordinator of health services?
It should say of, and thank you for picking up on that.
Thank you.
So, committee members? Do
I'll
we
make
feel
a-
that we should hold on to this?
Yeah. I was gonna say,
Al, you just muted, I'm sorry.
I would make a motion to present this to the board for approval.
For readoption with the title changes?
Yes.
Is there a second on that?
Second,
Thank you,
Juanita.
Juanita. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion so carries. All right. We are going to keep moving. Thank you very much for your patience as we do this. There are two policies that were part of CABE's recommended but not required policies that Kelly and Kim brought forward to us that could be helpful. And so we're going to take a look at those next, starting with the email electronic monitoring, 4118.4.
Thank you, Kate. So I just want to specify that these are not current policies that are in existence in our manual. These are CABE policies that are recommended for consideration. So it is up to us whether or not to institute this policy as well as the next one. But they are areas that have come up in practice as areas that we want to make sure staff are aware of. So I will answer, Kim will answer any questions related to the policy.
Just for the committee information, this is a similar policy that is in Stanford Public Schools currently.
Thank you, Al. Are there any questions from committee members about this policy?
Is the whole policy on the screen?
Oh,
Kelly?
it does go down quite a bit.
Kim, could you scroll down a little bit? Kim is driving now.
Sorry.
That's okay.
What is your recommendation, Kelly?
Kim and I have discussed this, and our recommendation would be to put this in place. I just think it highlights an important area to remind employees that our, electronic devices, particularly emails, are property of the district. This really specifies it and puts it into writing.
And this is not a required CABE policy?
That is correct. It is not required. It is one of their recommended good practice policies, but you do not have to have this.
And you
So
said.
whether, oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, you had said we've run into this problem as a district a couple of times. How often would you say that this is a problem? That this policy that's not required, we should, implement?
I can't speak to the exact number of times, Kim, if you want to chime in a little bit, but I think at times we have had to have conversations just on district email use with some employees, that a reminder that it's to be used for the job function and not for other things. And so, or comments on chats, for example, our electronic mail system has a GChat function, which is essentially like a text message. And just reminders that, so teachers can send them and they can be very helpful. I could send a message to a school counselor to say, I'm sending the student, from my class to you. They need to speak with you. They can respond and verify. But because it's like a text messaging type feature, it lends itself to kind of more casual conversation. So those have been things we've had to discuss with, not on a very frequent basis, but from time to time.
I would say actually something pertaining to what you send, how you sent it, personal use, with some frequency. Across all the bargaining units, I would say with some frequency. I think that it has become also, we have paid more attention to it since last summer's breach, because Gina and the tech team have been paying much closer attention to, do you have apps downloaded on our computers? Are you communicating with your personal emails and your work email? We just now have been looking at making sure that people who opened Apple IDs with their work email, we're working with Apple to switch those over to people's personal email addresses. So I think two things. I think one, it's an important policy to have because it starts to define for employees that if you have access to Gmail, danbury.k12.c2.us, that is for business use only, for work use only. The other is very frequently we will get well, you can't look at my email, or it's not fair that you look at my email, or you can't. And there are many times, some of which involve law enforcement, where we do look at people's emails. And so I think this is meant to put people on notice in a policy that, your email is not personal. It is the property of the district. And this, by putting it in a very clear policy and posting it, that's yet another way that people can be given notice that personal business happens elsewhere on another forum.
And do we provide the one-to-one as well, laptops and all that to all our employees, so they are actually on a district laptop, right?
Certified staff, certified staff get devices, non-certified staff get the Gmail account, but they don't get a device.
Okay, thank you.
For the most part. I mean, that's generalizing, but for the most part.
Any other questions about this suggested policy?
I don't have any questions, but I do have a comment. I just think that I like the policy. I think that it's clear. And I don't know if policies use bold print, but I think that the very first sentence, I think it's the first sentence, should be, no, I'm sorry. It's the second paragraph. All district electronic mail systems are owned by the district, are intended for the purpose of conducting official district business only. Just very clear. I just think it's just very clear, very simple. This does not belong to you. It is for business use only.
So highlighting that.
Thank you. That was, I like the policy, and I think it clearly states its intent.
And if I could just add, I think it's also something, we just recently wrapped up new teacher orientation, and this is something that as we issue them a new device, that we're having conversations with them to remind them that, this is a district issued device, as well as district issued email.
So it sounds like we want to highlight that first sentence of the second paragraph there.
Well, it was just a suggestion, but
I think it's a good one.
Yeah.
I think it's a good one. Is there a motion from the committee to recommend this for first read to the full board?
I make the motion to present to the board for approval.
Be for first read. May I have a second, please?
Second, Juanita.
Thank you, Juanita. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, motion so carries. Right, so we're gonna look at the next policy then, which is social networking.
I think just an opportunity to read this as well. This is another one that frequently comes up as far as the intersect between social media and your impact and ability to teach in a classroom, and just reminding staff that it cannot have a negative impact on the teaching and learning environment. So I'll give a moment just to take a look at it, and then if there's any questions.
Is this for certified staff?
Kim, if you could just scroll just to the top, just where the policy number is.
It's for both.
It's for both. Yep. It's got both listed numbers. So it's certified and non-certified. And sorry, just if any time there's a dual policy number listed, it means it applies to certified and non-certified. So that way you don't have to have a duplicate of the same exact policy for two different groups of individuals. It's intended to indicate which groups it applies to.
Jerry, you have a question?
Yeah, who decides? Or how does this work? Is this something that people are snitching on? I mean, I don't use social media, so I don't know.
So the specific at the bottom of the policy delegates this to the board and superintendent. So the specific who decides, if you look in that last paragraph under number 9, that paragraph right following it, if the board or superintendent believes that a staff member's activity on any social networking sites violates the district policies, the board or superintendent may request that the employee cease such activity. So it gives some, ability to make sure that there's not an outside influence on, the operations of our district.
Thank you.
I think, Sherry, too, that one of the ways to think about this is, there are lots of laws out there about sexual harassment, about bullying, about lots of conduct that may occur outside of our four walls, but that impact the educational process and therefore are grounds for whatever it is we might do, whether it's we, counsel, discipline, defend litigation, whatever it is. That's always been the case, and that will always continue to be the case. What this policy does is it gives a name to that kind of conduct in the world of social media. And so, it would otherwise be scooped under all of those laws anyway. But again, much like what I had said about the email, it kind of puts people on notice because people don't necessarily think of this as affecting their jobs. And so it puts people on notice that, you have to use particular care if you're out on what you think is your personal social media page, if it is impacting the workplace. And that's why I think, as I said, it gives a name to it in the social media context, as opposed to, you know, comments you make at a party or something like that. So that's, I think, why CABE proposes a policy like this. It's a different generation of folks now, the way that they use social media. It's an education at best on this.
Terry, you have another question?
I was, well, for example, throwing out examples. I was just reading, Meta decided the words "from the river to the sea" is not hate speech, that phrase. Some people it is, some people it isn't. What do you do?
You know, I think it's like any, you know, any employment related case that you would have over time. I think it's the same analysis. You know, we've got this structure of laws about what is discrimination, what is harassment, what is a hostile environment, what is bullying. We have this network of all of these standards. And this is saying, hey, folks, just so you know, your social media is not your private stuff. It also is fair game under some of these employment or education related statutes. And it's when you say, how do you know, it's really, it's a fact finder who's also ultimately going to know. You get in litigation, you have a judge, you have a jury, but it's also your administrators who have to make that fundamental decision. Is this conduct that's happening outside affecting the process inside? And if it is, and if it's a material affect on the workplace of some of your employees or on the educational process for some of your kids, then you would expect that your administrators will come in and say, hey, this is unlawful. This needs to stop. And by the way, you are on notice that your social network, your Facebook page or your Instagram is really not your private. It affects the workplace.
I mean, do we have somebody that checks staff social media?
No, it really comes up in the context of someone brings it to a supervisor or something. You know, we've had people make disparaging comments about colleagues, about administrators, in Facebook groups or on Instagram. We've had people who are in those groups and see those comments, bring it to their supervisors and say, did you see, this is what's going on out there. That's typically how it comes, because there's just, you know, you wouldn't have enough hours in your day to kind of watch everybody's postings. So
we need something like this then.
I think this is a generation particularly of employees that live in this world and don't appreciate that when they're doing something outside of work, that it could actually impact their workplace. So this kind of lets them know.
Sorry, Kim. And if I could just, we hold the same expectations for students, right? If a student is harassing, intimidating, bullying, threatening the school, another staff member, another student, we take that serious, and that's subject to discipline code for our students. And so this is no different for our staff. And I think that that's important to keep that parallel there.
Yeah.
Michelle, you had your hand up?
I see all the examples in one form, but I also, you know, see it in the opposite. Again, who is to judge? And somebody might find some material offensive, or it's freedom of speech. So for me, if this is not required, then I think it's an individual situation, and I get it. Social, you know, this is a big part of what's happening, but it's also you know, you commit to working and being as professional as you can, and you get evaluated. And we're talking about even certified merit, whatever. I think, you know, part of your life is part of your life. And so I would not support this if it was, you know, unless it's required. I could see it both way. I can totally see how, you know, the points you're making are valid and substantial, but then at the same time, there is some sort of privacy that I think people are entitled to as well. So I would not support this one.
So Kim, may I ask a question? If a case came forward where something like this was reported out and we don't have this policy in place, does it still inform, you know, proceedings against someone if there's evidence that it's caused a problem in school?
100% yes. Yes.
Okay.
So if you did not have this policy and someone made a threatening comment on their social media page that affected the workplace of a colleague, we absolutely would respond to it exactly the same way, whether you had this policy or not. What I think is good about this policy is I think that everybody who works in our organization should have notice that, you know, this is something that is conduct that we consider inappropriate, and that you're on notice that we may look at some of these things and respond accordingly. It's really, it would not change how I would tell anyone to respond or to defend litigation about it. It wouldn't change that at all, whether you had this policy or not. But it really is a transparency issue for it's good labor relations. It's a transparency issue for people who work for you.
Thank you
And
for the
so-
clarification.
Mhm.
Now, question for Kelly.
Mhm.
So Kelly, was this also emphasized at the new hire orientation? This
Um,
area covered,
yeah.
just
Yeah, so we don't have, was this policy presented? No, because it's not in place. But we try to, each department meets in very small groups, and then as well with building administrators, as well as a whole group presentation. And everything from dress code to use of email to, kind of your intersect between personal and work life, is discussed with new employees. I don't think, I think it's something that needs to be reinforced over time. And to Kim's point, I really feel that having something in writing that we could hand to particularly new employees would just further reinforce this.
Jerry?
One reason why I don't do social media anymore, if I could help it. I happen to like a comment. I thought it was a very benign comment about a political person. It was very, I thought it was very, very gentle comment. And I just said, oh, I liked it. And I got crucified by a recipient of that particular person's, Facebook page. I got crucified. And to the point where it was almost hate speech. And it's like, it's crazy out there in this world. It's nuts. I, it's like, I just don't, I'm for the policy because it's specific. Hopefully people will consider it before they post anything.
Thank you for the feedback. Anything else about this policy that folks would like to discuss or bring up? So, I'd like to ask for a motion to recommend this to the full board for a first reading.
I make the motion to present it to the board for approval.
Thank you, Al. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Terry, thank you for the second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? Any abstentions?
Abstention. Thank you.
Noted, Michelle, thank you. Motion carries. All right, we are at 7:45, and I know we have one more item that is listed on our agenda here. My inclination is to table this to the next meeting. I think it's going to require a little bit more robust conversation than the folks have energy for this evening after we've been on here for an hour and 45 minutes. So I just want to make sure that that is okay with committee members before I suggest that we do that.
What does it mean? Affiliations? What do you mean?
So a question came forward to the superintendent about whether or not board members should have to disclose any affiliations they have outside of being a Board of Education member. And the policy committee would be the committee in which that conversation appropriately takes place. It falls under the umbrella of the work we do here. So that's how it wound up on our agenda here. But again, I think that this is a conversation best served at our next meeting.
Thank you.
Is
Thank
that
you.
okay with everybody?
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you. With that in mind, I'd like to make a motion, entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting, please.
Can I ask a question, Kate?
Oh, yes, of course,
So,
Juanita.
are there those who are on this Zoom that were not committee members? Did we establish whether or not they get to comment?
It's at the purview of the chair running the meeting.
Okay.
The way I usually handle it is, if non-committee members have a comment, I ask them to raise their hand and I will recognize them at the appropriate time.
Okay.
But I guess, to that point, Juanita, I see that both Gladys and Louisa are on this call, and I'm just wondering if either of them has any comments that they'd like to share at this time.
No, I don't.
Thank you, Kate. No, I'm fine. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. So may I ask for a motion to adjourn, please?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Juanita, you get the second?
I'll do the second, Al.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Bye.
Aye. We are adjourned.